That sounds great. 18 years. Yeah. No. First went in 81. 81 in Kenya, and then in the 90s I would go for a month at a time to teach in Nigeria. And then in '03 we went to Zambia. And my dad did mission work in Pakistan and Australia when I was a teenager. So I've lived all over the world. Yeah, I've been everywhere but South America. And Antarctica, I guess. Who's been there? Huh? Yes. It is. That's why I'm talking low. Nobody can understand me.
Good morning. Good morning. We're going to try to get things going because David's got a lot of stuff he'd like to share, and it's something that we really need to grasp onto and listen to. He's got a good message. This is David French is here with us this morning. Lori is here as well. She's way in the back. So make sure you grab them, hold of them, and talk with them when you get the opportunity. David's been in Zambia for 18 years. You said 18 years, but that doesn't encompass his whole career in missions and his exposure to missions, but I'll let him talk about that. I'll start us off with a prayer, and then I'll just turn it over to David. All right, let's pray. Father, you are our Lord and our God. And I pray that your will be done on this earth just as it is in heaven. Father, please give us what we need each day. And as we listen to David's message here, help us to open our hearts, help us to focus our minds, and help us to connect to the amazing things that you are doing, but also listen for ways in which we can move with your spirit to further your will. And I pray this in your son's name. Amen. David?
Thank you, Jonathan. I usually don't give an introduction of myself, but since you put me on the hook there, basically my dad did mission work when I was a teenager in Pakistan and Australia, and my wife and I did mission work in Kenya after finishing at Harding Graduate School and in training in missions, and also took a lot of courses at ACU back in the early 80s. And we went to Kenya in the 80s and the 90s. I used to go over to Nigeria for a month at a time and teach in a Bible college in Nigeria. And then finally in 2003, we just decided to go full-time back into missions and have been in Zambia ever since. So that's a real quick little introduction to Lori and I and what we've been involved. I want to talk to you about our work in Zambia, and there's a picture of my wife there. Where are you, Lori? There she is. So feel free to talk to her. We'll talk to you about Zambia as much as you want to till 5 o'clock this evening if you wanted. But my daughter is also working with us. She stays all the time in Zambia, and she's kind of become our chief administrator. So this is kind of a family affair. In fact, all of my kids have worked and been in Zambia at one point or another with us. But Karen has remained there and works with us in that work. If you're not getting our newsletter, I would love to send that to you. We send it out by regular mail, and we have an email version. And they're different because the email version can have more pictures and video and all that. But there's back there on the information table, there's a sign-up sheet, or you can write your email address real nice and neat so I can read it, or your regular mail, and I'll be glad to add you to our mailing list and would love to send that to you. But there is a little sign-up sheet back there on the information table that you can sign up for as well. And there's a few brochures that you can pick up that's about some different parts of our ministry in Zambia as well. We've been, as Jonathan said, in Zambia now for the past 18 years. And I just want to say up front, why should we be doing this work in Zambia? Why should we be in Africa doing spiritual leadership training? Because I think that is really the greatest need that we now have for work in Africa, is we need to be serious about trying to develop spiritual leaders for the churches. And I'm going to talk a lot about why today, but just up front, I'll just tell you, you may or may not be aware of this, but there are more people professing to be Christian in Africa than anywhere else in the world, and that outbeats South America even, and most of the rest of the world. You can compare that to the United States, but of course we know numbers of people claiming to be Christian in the Western world doesn't really tell the story. When you look at church attendance, you'll get a little bit better picture of it. But when you look at it, there's twice as many people that go to church on Sunday in Africa than go to church in all of North America and Europe combined. Africa they're projecting that in the next 30 years that Africa will have 1.3 billion people claiming to be Christian. That's going to be twice as many as any other continent in the world. There are three places in the world that I am particularly concerned about as far as missions. One is China, because not just because of its population, just because China is becoming such a world player in economics and power in the world, and it really concerns me that you don't have a strong Christian community there to influence the Chinese government. India, receptivity is better than most places in the world, and it's the most populous country in the world now, just right. If it hasn't passed China, it's just fixing to. It keeps kind of going back and forth right now. But India, and then, of course, Africa, because of the receptivity is so great in Africa. Now, our ministry in Zambia has three main parts to it. The Bible College is our primary ministry. I'm going to focus most of my time talking about that. But before I get into that, I want to deal with two other ministries, our so-called humanitarian ministries. One is the primary school, and this is kind of the area that my wife focuses on because she's a school teacher, master's in education. So this is kind of her area that she's been working with. We have a primary school with grades K through 7 with capacity for about 250 to 300 students. There's a real need in our community because there's not a school anywhere in our area. And that presented a problem for us because we have between 30 and 60 kids that live on our campus, our students, children, and the children of our staff. So we kind of had to start our own school there because there was nowhere for all these kids on our campus to go. But we wanted to do a quality education program. Africa, especially Zambia, education is quite poor. And we wanted to do a school that would be academically profitable or meaningful to the children coming to our school. But we wanted especially to develop a Christian component. Christian education is really kind of something that hasn't developed in most of the Christian organizations and churches of Africa. Africa is age-oriented. They honor the elderly. Children just kind of, they just don't really focus on them. You know, in America, we have a dinner on the ground, you see, we let the kids and, the children go through first and then the adults. But in Africa, it's always the old men and then the men, and the women and children will be last and get whatever's left over, which often isn't a whole lot. Just kind of totally opposite. So they just don't, Africa doesn't invest in children, and a lot of churches there haven't developed Sunday schools. There's not much that they have for children, and when worship is 2 to 3 hours long, as it is in most churches, and there's nothing for kids, that's really tough for kids. And a lot of parents just leave their kids at home, which really concerns me. They just haven't developed spiritual education for the children in our churches. And that bothers me because in most African countries, half the population is under 18 years of age. So this is a big oversight that we're trying to address. One of the things we did a couple of years ago is we hired one of our most spiritual-minded students and his wife, who also went through our program. We hired him and his wife to be the campus minister, to work with our primary school, just really focusing on the spiritual life of our children, doing daily chapels, teaching Bible classes in our school, and also ministering to the families of all of our children, which is part of our outreach program in the community. And one big part of it, too, is that our primary school provides a place for our Bible college students and their wives to get practical experience learning how to be a school teacher, because we hope in many cases that our Bible college students and their wives will go back home to the village where there is no school and start a school in their church. And that will help increase their influence in the community and provide a great service to the local villages where they go. But the primary school provides a a setting for our Bible college students and their wives to get practical experience being school teacher, but doing Christian education, working with children and helping to minister to the children in a spiritual sort of way. And that's a very important part of the overall training that we give to our students in the Bible college. So they get that practical experience working with children in our primary school. We've done quite a few things in the last 2 years to help improve our primary school. We hired 6 new teachers recently, which gives us 12, replaced a couple that didn't have adequate education. Big thing that we did is we hired an assistant director to work with my wife in running the daily school. He's a good Christian man. His wife is also one of our teachers. He's working on a master's degree, and he's just really increased the academic and spiritual depth of our quality of our primary school. And then, as I said, we hired a campus minister, and then we built 6 new classrooms. So now every class has its own classroom with its own teacher. And before we had to double up, 2 grades in one class with one teacher. But now every grade's got its own classroom with its own teacher. So we've developed a really good primary school for our community. We finished our auditorium for the primary school here in the last year, and that we do graduations and special events and all the school activities, which is part of our outreach program, which brings the parents and the community in and helps us build relationships with the local community. So we've got a really good primary school, which is ministering to our community, and this doesn't cost us a whole lot of money. It's really quite amazing how cheap we can run a school there compared with here in the United States. One thing we did a few years ago is we started a lunch program because we realized so many of our students coming to our school were seriously malnourished. Zambia is, according to the UN, the most malnourished country in all of Africa. And we're one of the poorest, but we are the most malnourished. It's not because they're starving, it's because about 80 to 90% of what they eat is corn. And that's their main diet. It's nothing but starch. They get very little protein. So Zambians are very short and small and thin and malnourished. And that's why so many of our children die before they reach adulthood, because they're so malnourished. So we saw these children, they miss school a lot because they're sick all the time, and they don't run around and play football, soccer at recess. They don't laugh a lot. They come without eating, and they're sitting there hungry most of the day. So we started the lunch program, and it was amazing to us how that really helped those kids just overnight. I mean, they just perked up and started laughing and playing and being what we would call normal kids, and their academics improved even. And they stopped missing so much school because of being sick. So here in the this year, we added a breakfast program, and one reason because the kids either come without eating, but if their families do cook for them, see, everything has to come from scratch. They don't have refrigerators and, microwaves and nothing, cold cereal, whatever like that. Everything has to be cooked from scratch. So by the time the mother gets up and cooks, these kids are coming an hour or so late for school. So we started the breakfast program now, and these kids are getting 2 good, nutritious meals every day. And by the way, we don't have any problems with kids being late anymore. Breakfast is from 7 to 7:30. If you aren't there, you don't get breakfast. They don't come late anymore, and attendance is much better. It's just this doesn't cost us a lot of money, about $12 a day, and boy, does it make a big difference. See, these kids will grow up and be stronger and healthier than other kids in Zambia. They're most likely to survive malaria if they get it, and they'll grow up to be good, able to work hard and provide a living for their families when they grow up, be healthier adults. Another ministry is that of our children's ministry, which we call Karen's Kids. My daughter's name is Karen, and kind of got that name because she just started helping orphans and vulnerable kids, and we just kind of started referring, well, that's Karen's Kids over there. And so we call it Karen's Kids. But this is a ministry that my daughter started about 12 years ago because she saw so many children dying. We knew that half the kids of Zambia die before they're 12 years old, but as we started looking at it, it's really in the first 2 or 3 years of life. And the main reason is that something happens to the mother. The mother dies in childbirth or soon after, which is still very common in most of Africa, especially Zambia. Or mothers are too malnourished. Remember, Zambia is the most malnourished country. And so the mothers are malnourished. They can't adequately nurse their children. Or the mother has HIV/AIDS. 25% of the mothers of Zambia have HIV/AIDS and shouldn't nurse their children. They'll pass the virus to their children and they die from that in 4 or 5 years. So they don't have a substitute for nursing. They can't afford cow's milk. You got to have money to have a cow or buy cow's milk or keep a cow. And most people don't have enough land. They just don't have cows in Zambia. They can't afford baby formula for sure. That's $45, $50 a month imported from South Africa. They can't afford that. So they just really don't have a substitute. And that's why so many of these children are seriously malnourished. And here comes dysentery, malaria, or something like that. And that easily kills these children in the first 2 or 3 years of life. So several things that Karen does now. The primary thing she does is she finds through referrals and things, and she vets these children to find those who are really in need, but she will give them baby formula for up to 2 years. She will help some of them with the medicine when they get sick, or sometimes with an operation or hospital care when they get sick and get put in the hospital. And then she will help some children who have special needs, because Africa doesn't have enough money to help kids. They certainly don't for kids with special needs. That's something not even thought of, I think. So she will help some of these children with handicaps or special needs. I'm throwing up a few pictures just to kind of show you some of the kids that Karen has helped over this past year, some recent kids. This last picture, when Karen sent it to me, I looked at it and I thought, something's wrong with that picture. And it took me a day or two to figure it out. And finally, I dawned on me, that kid's plump. You just don't see plump kids in Zambia. This kid's on baby formula. He's healthy. Maybe he needs to lay off the baby formula a little bit there, but he's a healthy baby. So those are 2 of our children's ministries that we're engaged in. Now let me spend most of my time talking about the Bible College, because that is our primary ministry, and that's kind of the area that I focus on. We have a nice big auditorium that we do graduations and worship on Sunday morning and special events and lectureships that we can use that auditorium. In our auditorium, we also have a large classroom where we can do combined classes with all the students and their wives that are in our Bible college at one time. Like this was taken in July when I was there. I taught 3 classes, and so I had all the students there in that one class. But we have a small classroom, and then we also have a 3rd classroom in our office building. So that gives us 3 classrooms for first year, second year, and third year students. So we're a 3-year program that we have there. And then we have a classroom that's just dedicated for the women, because our students have to bring their wives, and the wives have to go through our women's program. We don't just teach Bible and stuff. We teach some ministry and then practical skills and nutrition and a lot of things, sewing and farming and agriculture and stuff to the wives there as well. So they'll be able to go back to the village and be a real asset to the women in their villages when they go back. We have 30 married student apartments. These are just simple 3-room houses. They don't have indoor plumbing or kitchens or toilets or any of that. They're just 3 rooms with a light bulb. And we did that on purpose. Everything is really outside because we don't want to increase the standard of living of our students. They come from the bush. We want them to go back to the bush. And we don't want to ruin them with city living. We have a dorm that we're finishing up even as we speak, be finished here in the next few days. But that allows us to keep some single students. Our main focus is we want married students, which I'll mention in a minute. But with the students and their wives, we have capacity for about 90 to 100, and we don't want to get any bigger. I know we Americans, I'm fighting my own DNA here, because bigger is better, and we want to mass scale up everything, you know. But I have learned that when you're really after quality, which is what we're focused on, there's a point where you get maximum proficiency. And we've reached that point. And if we try to go bigger, I mean, it'd be great to come back and tell you guys, we got 300 Bible students in our college. That sounds impressive, right? But we're after quality, and so we're not going to get any bigger. I'm going to stick at that number. We have had over 750 students that have graduated through our college in these 18 years. The last 4 groups that we have had to graduate from our college are remarkably superior than what we produced in the first 10, 12 years. And the reason is because when we shifted from our old campus to our new campus in 2015, we totally overhauled our ministry, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And this new approach that we're doing to train men is far superior. It took us 10, 12 years of experience to learn how to do this right. And at least we think we're doing it right. But it's really producing some quality students. And now the feedback we're getting from our students who have graduated in the last 4 classes are we're hearing much, much better reports of what they're doing in ministry. So we're really happy with what kind of student we're now producing from our school. Our mission statement for our Bible college is that we're there to train and develop self-supporting spiritual leaders who are equipped for holistic rural ministry. Now, there's 3 parts to this. We want to train men who are self-supporting. We don't want them getting money from America, which I think is one of the worst things you can do, is support guys to be preachers in a church in a third world country. I could talk an hour or 2 about that one. But I don't think that's a good thing to do, and I don't want them to get on American support. And the trouble is Africa can't afford full-time preachers. That's an American thing where you have a church with a full-time guy. Africa can't. There's a few places in the cities that might be able to afford a full-time guy, but Africa can't afford full-time preachers. And so we've produced tons of preachers who go out expecting to be supported, and the churches can't afford them, and that causes some real problems. They become a burden to the church. They start being tempted to embezzle money from the church and other bad things. So that's not a good thing. We want them to be self-supporting. We also want to equip them to do holistic rural ministry. I'll explain that in a minute. That means ministering both to the physical and the spiritual needs of people. But the most important part of our mission statement is that we want to develop spiritual leaders. And if we don't do anything else right, the one thing that we want to make sure we do right is to develop spiritual leaders. And that's what my main focus is on. I'm looking at the other things we're trying to do, but I'm really looking and want to make sure we succeed in producing a quality student who's a spiritual, his character, and who he is as a disciple of Jesus Christ. That's what I am most concerned about. Now, that means our main focus of our school is what I call spiritual formation. You can call it other things, life formation, life transformation, or disciple making, or sanctification, whatever. I call it spiritual formation. Now, the question is, you ask, why is spiritual formation your number one priority? I mean, it's number one by a mile, okay? Why? Well, Zambia, like most of Africa, is very receptive. 85% of Zambians claim to be Christian. You may not be aware of this, but there are more people that attend church in Africa than attend church in all of North America and Europe combined. In fact, based on what information I could find, it looks like it's about 2 to 1, twice as many people going to church in Africa now than in all of North America and Europe combined. And if it wasn't for Catholics in Europe and Mexico, I shudder to think what the numbers might really be like. There are now more members of the Church of Christ in Africa and more churches of Christ in Africa than there are now here in North America. And as I said in the beginning, the gravitational center of Christianity has shifted to the southern hemisphere. And that's why in missions it's all about the global south now, because that's where the gravitational center of Christianity has now shifted. So receptivity is very high in Africa. However, it's extremely superficial, in my opinion. Profession without transformation. And so you say, why is that the case? Well, one reason is Christianity has really only been in Africa for the last 75 years. Now, it's been there for a long time, even really back all the way to the Apostles' day, but it hasn't grown a whole lot up until World War II. And after World War II, because Africa got exposed to the rest of the world and opened up to the West, and Americans started sending so many missionaries, not just Church of Christ, but everybody started sending so many missionaries to Africa. I mean, Christianity has just exploded in Africa. I mean, it has exploded. There's no comparison in all of the last 2,000 years that compares to the kind of growth that we've seen in the world as we have seen in Africa in the last 75 years. It is just phenomenal. But here's the problem. When you grow that fast, that quick, you also have problems. How are you going to develop good leaders for all those new churches and those Christians? How are you going to disciple and help all those people mature? It becomes a real problem. Now, they've really had only 75 years. Now, we've had 2,000 years in the Western world, and it's good to know that we have perfected it after 2,000 years. Sarcasm there. Can't help it, don't do that. They've had 75 years, so, what do you expect, right? You're going to have growth problems, and that's where we are with Africa. Another thing is Africans didn't grow up with a Judeo-Christian value system. I have to be careful I get too deep here because of time. But basically, their religion, if you want to call it that, because religion is not a good way to refer to it. It's not organized or established or anything. But their belief system, religious, spiritual experience, they're very spiritual people. They're far more spiritual than we are. Now, they're not more righteous. We're far more righteous. But we're so influenced by secularism, they will astonish you how spiritual they are. They believe in the spirit world, believe me, big time. But their religion or belief system is very ritualistic. In other words, you go through you do certain religious acts, I guess you would call it practices, religious practices, and that will, you do the ritual and it will produce a certain effect, cause and effect. You do the ritual, it will cause the thing. A good way of illustrating is, I noticed when I first went to Africa in the 80s, I've had this conversation so many times, an African walks out of church and he'll say, God is going to bless me. And why do you say that? Well, because we went to church today, we took the Lord's Supper, we put money in the collection plate, and we did worship right. We didn't use an instrument. God is really going to bless me. And I say, yeah, but what about this woman, over here you've been seeing ain't your wife, or you're drinking, or you're just dishonest in your business, and everybody in the village knows not to trust you. You lie, you gossip, Yeah, but I went to church today. God is going to bless me. You see, if I do the ritual, then it's going to give me the desired effect. And so that's the way they try to approach God when they become Christians. It's sort of like they're trying to manipulate God. God, like, I went to worship God and gave him money, so now God owes me one. And, you try to explain that's not the way it works, but they just don't really get it, that Christianity is about who you are and how you live and how you don't beat your wife anymore. And, they just don't understand that. And so that's where we're really struggling with in Africa. And another key factor, third thing, is that I don't think we missionaries, not just Church of Christ, but across the board, I just don't think we missionaries have done a good job of developing leaders for the church. We have taken an American college ministry training programs and preacher training schools and a Western education approach, and we plopped them down in Africa, and we ran all these guys through our Bible colleges and preacher training schools, and we trained them and gave them a lot of information. They went through our curriculum, they graduated, and we just kind of didn't really see the deeper level of who they were in terms of their character and their spiritual life. And that's where I'm really seeing the real problem is right now. We have not developed good leaders for the churches. And I have talked to denominational missionaries and heads of denomination in Africa, and I know what's going on with what I've seen across Africa, and I'm hearing the same thing. Our leaders, they're corrupt, they're immoral, they're stealing from the church treasury, they're engaged in sexual misconduct, and, and they're preaching the gospel of prosperity. You know what the gospel of prosperity is? 2 Corinthians 9, if you give to the Lord and the Lord's going to bless you. You hear that here in America, right? Sunday morning, turn on your TV, the 800 numbers flashing. I mean, they'll take cryptocurrency now. And you send your money in, and God's going to give you that new job or new house, new Mercedes-Benz, whatever. Well, that's become so much the gospel in Africa because we got all these guys we've trained, and the churches can't afford them, so now they're preaching about money, 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 money. Give because they need an income. And the churches can't afford them, so that we've created some real problems there in Africa. So what we're really needing for Africa is spiritual leaders. And when I began to realize this some years ago, because I was kind of trained in the days when I got training, it was missions is about church planning. But as I started getting in Africa and seeing what's going on, I've changed, and I said, no, it's about disciple making. I mean, I realized in Africa, I can go anywhere, throw a dart in a map and go there, and in a week or two, I can baptize a bunch of people and plant a church. But that doesn't mean I've made a disciple. If I want to make a disciple, I got to go there and work with those people for 3 or 4 years. And just to blow through and baptize a bunch of people and plant a church and go on to the next village doesn't accomplish a whole lot. But we have done a whole lot of that. And I realized it's about making disciples. And when I said that, a little bell went off in my head, and I thought, seems like I've heard that somewhere before. Make disciples. Where have I heard that? Matthew 28, right? Go make disciples. Didn't say go plant churches. You go make disciples. It's about teaching people to obey and to follow Jesus in a way of living your life. And so if we're going to make disciples in Africa, we've really got to get serious about developing spiritual leaders who are able to make followers or disciples of Jesus. So the next question is, having explained why I think spiritual formation is so needed in Africa now, how do you do that? Well, boy, is that the big question. And I've been trying to answer that for the last 15 years. And I've basically come up with, we've done 3 things. One thing is when we moved to our new campus in 2015, I totally changed our whole approach to training leaders. And I went from a 2-year to a 3-year program. And instead of having dorms, which meant I got mostly unmarried guys or guys there without their wives, and they were kind of young, unmarried, or there without their wives, that presented a lot of problems, if you know what I mean by that. I put an electric fence around the campus, and I joked to Lori once. I said, I think that fence is not to keep the thieves out, it's to keep my students in from jumping the fence and going to the prostitutes across the road. That was really discouraging. And when we moved to our new campus, I said, no, I want married students. I want some older men. I want a 3-year, instead of 2 years, I need 3 years with them. I want 75% of them to be married. Their wives have to come with them. And the women have to go through our women's program. That's a requirement. You can't go through our school if your wife isn't there and doesn't go through our program. I want them to be older, more mature. I want them to already be engaged in ministry. I want to see guys that already want to serve God and they're already doing it. I get all kinds of letters, guys writing me. I'd love to do this ministry. They're not doing anything now, but if I pay them, they'll do it. I want guys that already show that they're committed to doing the Lord's work. And then I want to get recommendations from their home congregation that they're worthy of being trained. And then we go and interview them. We vet them. So now we're getting a much better quality of student coming into our school. And even better now, our graduates that are going out there, they know the kind of students that ought to come to our school. And now we're getting recommendations coming to us. So the quality of our students is getting better every year. And we're training them for 3 years instead of 2 years. So that's made a big difference. The second thing I did is I had to develop a teaching staff that knows how to do spiritual formation. And that's taken a lot of work to develop and keep them focused on. It's not about passing the courses and how much Bible knowledge they know. That's important, but what I'm really concerned about is the spiritual life of these students and how you go about developing their spiritual life. And then the third thing is your actual curriculum. And I hate that word, but there's not another word I know to use. I mean, how do you actually develop spiritual life in a school setting? Well, after 14, 15 years of working on this, I've come up with basically 7 or 8 different things that I think you need to do in order to help develop the spiritual life of someone. And we have designed our Bible college training program around these 7, 8 things that we try to do. And I wish I had time to talk about this because I've spent 15 years working on this. I have a sermon on it, but this is something I think we need to be doing here in America, making disciples, developing the spiritual life of people. And so anyway, it involves more than just teaching Bible. It's about helping people take the Bible and apply it to their life and bring it about and facilitating spiritual transformation in their life. Now, then that's the spiritual. We want to develop spiritual leadership. Now, the second part of our mission statement is we want them to be self-supporting for reasons that I explained a few minutes ago. And the way we do that is we teach them agriculture, crop rotation, different crops they can grow, using raised beds, but especially drip irrigation, because in Zambia it rains only about 4.5 months out of the year, and then the other 7-8 months it doesn't rain a drop. So, but you can grow food year-round in Zambia, because the temperature doesn't change much, but you can grow food year-round if you have water, but that's the problem. They don't have running water and faucets. There's usually a pump at the nearest primary school where there's a stream or river, and most people, to get water, have to walk 3 or 4 or 5 miles to get their water. Now, we teach them drip irrigation because that's the most economical use of water, and if they can fill 3 or 4 of these buckets every day, they can grow plenty of vegetables, enough even to sell and make money from it. But you can make some money selling fresh vegetables in the middle of the dry season. And so we teach them how to grow things like beans that are high in protein, so they get some protein into their diet. So we teach them a lot of this basic agriculture, and we also teach them how to raise chickens. Gives them protein, but they can make good money selling chickens in the villages by growing them. So we teach them a lot about that. A lot of basic, I have a full-time agriculture teacher who teaches them all this agriculture. Now, when our students come, we give them a plot of land on our campus. We show them how to do it, and then for the next 3 years, they grow their vegetables, and that's how they live because I don't feed them. So the 3 years that they're with us, they're self-supporting, and that has guaranteed that these guys, when they go back home, can be self-supporting because they were already self-supporting for the 3 years that they were with us, and they mastered these skills and the knowledge that we taught them, and then when they go back to the village, they are able to do this. And agriculture is not our most important part of our ministry, but it has proven to be the most successful. I mean, the stories I'm hearing from our students that go back to the village, they're making good money now. Growing fresh vegetables in the dry season and raising chickens, they're doing very well. In fact, it's even enabled our students to help support the church ministry. So instead of the church, them being a burden to the church, they're actually helping the ministry in the churches that they're engaged in. So that's a very important part of it. Now, the third thing is we want our students to be able to do holistic rural ministry. And what I mean by that is ministering both to the physical and the spiritual needs of people. And we're doing that because I think that's what Jesus did. He came preaching and ministering to the physical needs of people. And you can't ignore the physical needs of people in places like Africa. They're so poor. They're struggling. They're suffering. And in Africa, if your religion, if I can use that term, if your religion doesn't help you with the here and now, it's worthless. Because that's the way animism works, their religious belief system. And so it's very important that our students know how, not just to minister in the church and do church work and spiritual things, but they need to be able to help people with their whole of their life, to be holistic in their ministries. So we're trying to teach them that. Now we teach them agriculture, not only so they can support themselves, but also that when they go back to the village, they'll be able to teach the people in the village how they can do drip irrigation and grow beans with protein and raise chickens over the next 5-10 years wherever they go. That's how I think we solve the problem of Zambia being the most malnourished country in all of Africa, is we teach them how to do low-tech, sustainable, affordable, reproducible agriculture. And that's a very important part of our training, is our students can take this expertise that they have learned back to the village with them and help the people in the local village. We also teach our students and their wives how that they can be school teachers and do Christian education in the churches where they are. We also teach our students how to work with orphans and vulnerable children as they get practical experience working with Karen's Kids Children's Ministry, so that when they go back to the village, they can help organize the churches and the community to respond to all the orphans and vulnerable children living in the villages. You see, Africa has 50 million AIDS orphans. I mean, we have a huge problem with orphans and vulnerable children there. This is a huge need in Africa. and they're a real burden to the villages. And so it's very important that our churches learn how to minister without a lot of foreign money, be able to minister with what they have in the local villages. And then we teach our students basic medicine. A lot of it's preventive medicine. There's so much that you can do that can help stave off disease. You know, malaria prevention and, of course, HIV prevention and other things. But my wife does a lot of this teaching. She teaches a course Where There Is No Doctor, and empowers or equips our students to go back to the village and even serve kind of as a health officer or help with people who are sick in the local villages. They can diagnose a lot of the things that ail people because a lot of it's the same old stuff over and over. And then we do a lot with marriage and family. They have run into real problems in Africa with marriage because they went from arranged marriages that were stable because they didn't have a lot of expectations. None of this love and romance stuff that, we Westerners get into. But now they've been influenced by the West and Hollywood, and now they want to marry by choice. And if you marry by choice, you'll get divorced, which is what we have gotten now in Western culture when we move to love marriages. And but the other thing is, if you want a love marriage, their expectations have increased. But if you want love and romance in your marriage, you got to learn some relational skills that they haven't yet learned. And we're having real serious problems. The change has been so fast. And men still treat their wife like they're a slave. They beat their wives, and they don't do what they want, and they're demanding. And women do most of the work. I sometimes don't know what men do. But yet they still treat their wife very poor. And I'm telling you, women can give it back. I've seen it. And, we got a real problem. And so in our Bible college, we're trying to teach our students relational skills so their marriages will be better, but they'll go back to the village and at least they can teach the next generation how men and women should treat one another in marriage if they really want love and romance, which they do want, but they just don't have the relational skills yet to do that. So that's another thing we do. So we're trying to equip our students to do spiritual and physical minister to physical needs of people when they go back to the village. And so our students, when they go back to the village, they're going to, and they have been, they're going to become a real asset and an informational person, and it elevates their influence in the community as a village leader. And over time, they'll have a powerful influence, especially on the next generation as they minister to the children of the villages as well. So these are our three main ministries that we are engaged in. We have some other ministries I don't have time to talk about. We have an optical clinic. We don't run it all the time, just when Lori is there in Zambia. She has a $14,000 machine that some folks in Amarillo donated to buy this equipment, and she can give people an eye exam and give them a prescription, and we can give them donated prescription eyeglasses. We also can give them reading glasses as well, so we can help people around in our community in that way. So if you look at our ministry, not only are we teaching our students to do holistic ministry, but we're also trying to practice what we preach, because we as a ministry, Daybreak, we are also engaged in holistic ministry. There's the Bible College, and then we have our children's ministries. We are focused on children because we think that's where we can do the most good with the least amount of money, because we don't have a whole lot of money to do these humanitarian ministries. But we found some ways that we can make a big impact with children for not a whole lot of money. The money that comes mostly from churches does go to our Bible colleges, and if people send us money by default, it goes to the general fund, which is mostly the Bible college. But we have some churches and some individuals that do contribute to our humanitarian ministry to help save the life of children. And But most of our humanitarian ministry is supported by individuals who want to give to that. And so if you want to help, there's some ways you can do that. The brochure's back there in the back. Karen's Kids Children's Ministry, the primary school, the lunch program, or something like that. And the last thing I'll mention is we have started an endowment fund. I'm 65. I have no plans to retire. I don't know how many more years that the Lord's going to enable me to keep doing this, but one day I won't physically be able to continue traveling and visiting churches. They can now pretty much operate without me in Zambia, and that was my goal from day one, is work yourself out of a job. You don't want them to be dependent on you. The part I can't deal with is I've tried to figure out a way that I could generate some kind of income in Zambia, or they could pay tuition, but Zambia is too poor, and I've tried for 18 years to figure that problem, and it just ain't going to happen. So, unfortunately for Zambia, they're going to, at least for the foreseeable future, be continually depending on American funds. The problem is when I can't continue, then what? Now, all the good students we trained, that's not going to go away, but our school will run into some problems, our Daybreak ministry, and because it is dependent upon our ability to train future generations of students will be in jeopardy. So we're trying to encourage people to contribute, estate planning or whatever, to contribute to our endowment fund, and there's a brochure back there that deals with that too. You know, one day we may be very happy that our great-great-grandchildren may be blessed because we have developed Christians in Africa who one day will come here. The way America seems to be going right now, you know, Africans they hear what's going on in America. They keep asking me, what's going on in America and Europe? You know, I hear all this stuff. And I'm hearing more and more of them saying, one day we're going to send missionaries to America. And I'm glad to hear them say that. They're already thinking it. I'm glad to hear. I just kind of wish they didn't say it so cocky. You know, one day we're going to send missionaries to America. And I don't like hearing that, but I'm glad you're all thinking that way, because one day they may be doing that. In fact, they're already doing it in Europe. It's called immigration. Now, you hear about Europe, all the immigration Syrians going into Europe, because, you know, Europe over the past, 2 or 3 generations, just not been having enough children. They call it the birth dirge. They haven't had enough children. And so who's going to be the doctors and nurses and plumbers and do all the service jobs? Because they don't have the young people to do that. Their population has gotten old. They need these immigrants to do all those jobs. And they're ripping them off out of Africa. Africa doesn't like it. They call it the brain drain, because Europe is stealing their best and brightest because they can get good paying jobs and live in Europe. And it's hurting Africa. But here's the thing. Africa people are Christians there. And they're migrating in huge numbers. You just don't hear about it, but they're migrating in huge numbers to Europe. And they're planting churches all over Europe. And it's kind of exciting. You know, if you've been to Europe, you know, there's these big cathedrals. You go into them. I love going into them. They're big, beautiful buildings. And when I'm there, I always try to find someone, you know, their janitor or somebody back in the back. And I say, is there a church that still meets here? Most of the time they go, oh, no, there's no church that meets here on Sunday. Sometimes they'll say, yeah, I think there's a group that meets back there in the far wing in the basement over there. But here's the thing. You can walk out of those big, beautiful church museums now, walk down a street or two, and there's a shopping center, and there is a church that an African has started. You see, Africans are reseeding Christianity all across Africa now. And one day they may be migrating here and doing the same for us. And by the way, who's going to evangelize the Islamic world? It ain't going to be us. Africans are already doing it. They're already doing it. Far more than what we are. Koreans are also, a lot of them doing it. But so, you know, Christianity may seem like it's kind of falling into bad times here in America in our backyard, and we get discouraged about that. But folks, don't be discouraged. You don't realize the kingdom of God has grown mightily in the last 75 years. It's gotten much bigger than it was 75 years at the close of World War II. The kingdom of God is growing, just not right now in our backyard, but God can take care of that. You see, we're not in retreat. And by the way, we know who wins in the end, right? So be of encourage. And the work that we have done overseas, look at all these flags here. The work that y'all have been doing here, it's going to pay off, and it already has. So I want to pray for you to continue keeping up the good fight. Thank you. My time's up. Thank you.